From one dystopian sci-fi thriller on Apple TV to a Marvel TV show on Disney Plus. I don't know how to go about that. We're going to move on to Secret Invasion now, which hit its halfway point this week with episode 3, Betrayed. We're going to have a discussion about it, do a deep dive into it. And we were saying last week that this is a big episode. And joining me to discuss it, it can only be one. And I've gone out and done it. I promised I would last week. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Dan Lynam. I don't know how at the end. I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. Yeah. It's a work in progress.
I think don't touch it. It's perfect. I think we're on top of the mountain right now. And the only way is down. You reach heights that very few humans have attained.
Dan, pleasure as always to have you here to discuss and break down the episode. Guys, spoiler warning, you are not in a spoiler-free safe space now. This is called Into the Spoilerverse, and we are going to talk about spoilers. What are we going to be talking about specifically? We're going to talk about everything that's happened in the MCU up until now. We're not taking anything off the table. If it has been released, it is up for grabs. We're going to talk about everything that's happened in Secret Invasion here as well. We're also may dip into comic book lore, but when we do so, we're not looking to we want you to be able to go back and read and enjoy the stories for yourself. So we're not going to go into too spoiler heavy stuff in terms of individual plot stuff, but the information we'll give away will be just to enhance your viewing experience, to give you more stuff to think about, and to give you more context or into Easter eggs and the likes that have shown up in this week's episode. But before we get into our discussion, as we always do, we have to put you back into the mindset of the episode you watched as we get ready to move on to episode 4 this week. So ladies and gentlemen, the only way we can do that is with our alternate recap of episode 3, Betrayed. And Gravik meets members of the Skrull Council and reveals his plan to launch a Navy strike to get humanity at each other's throats so they can sneak in as superpowered WMDs to lead to the extinction of humanity. We then cut to an AI-created intro, which, to be honest, feels a lot more part of the thing that'll actually bring us all down than whatever it was Gravik just said. Fury tries to suss out if Priscilla went to the dark side while he abandoned her, which would be an incredibly sound wife move of her to basically just be like, no, I didn't talk to any of my friends in all the time since you ghosted me and just stayed away from them and stayed loyal to you while you gave me no indication you were coming back. Instead, she does that time-honored trick, human or Skrull, of giving a vague answer, so you know she's pissed, but she does still love him after all. Talos and Gravik meet in a museum cafe fully populated and staffed by Skrulls, because when you're about to take over a planet, you really want all of your best soldiers serving coffee to art lovers. Talos makes a threat so horrific to Gravik that I can barely repeat it. He says that if Gravik doesn't stop and or give back his daughter, he's gonna tell on him. So there you go. Gravik was shitting himself and immediately backed down. End of series. Obviously, Gravik didn't stop because he's not 8. So Talos begrudgingly joins back up with Fury to track down the Navy commander who's been Skrullified to try and stop Gravik's military assault. They kill him because he said what when he was asked to describe what Marcellus Wallace looked like. So instead, they need to call in Skrullisi to get the intel needed to call off the attack. However, as Skrullisi tried to escape, Gravik said, "Oh no, you don't," and stuck her in the big Marvel fridge in the sky. Potentially. But probably not, because Emilia Clarke is expensive. Let's call a spade a spade. Meanwhile, after getting a gun, Priscilla gets a call and asks to speak to Gravik, but instead it's Rhodey, more than likely, she's speaking to, and acts about as surprised as the rest of us who watched this show for 5 minutes and all said, yeah, Rhodey's a Skrull. Anyway, guys, that was episode 3 of Secret Invasion. And Dan, we are now at the halfway stage. Very important stage. We said this time last week, we telegraphed that we need to have the show in some kind of momentum and where we want it to be to kind of set up for the big showdown. Is it there after this episode?
No, I don't think so. I was watching it. It flew in faster than I thought it would. It didn't really feel like an hour this time around. Usually you could see that as being a good thing, but I think it was because I was expecting the big crescendo to come, and I didn't really feel like it did. I was kidding, yeah, with Gaia being shot at the end, but of course we all have our suspicions that she's not, for a number of reasons. But I was waiting for something more. The betrayal thing was almost like playing out 20 minutes beforehand, but yeah, I think they've a lot more to cover, but I still have hope for one key reason.
Okay, and that is?
Well, I just think that like while I was watching Falcon and Winter Soldier, I really go back and when I'm watching that, the last two episodes are the ones I watch the most. And that's the one where I felt that all the setup built to. It was a slow burn when you look at Falcon and Winter Soldier as one entity. But man, that last episode, it just pays back your patience as a viewer in dividends. It was just such an excellent build up to the action that we were promised the whole time. And it delivered. I'm kind of expecting now next week at episode 4 to set up the end, and for 5 and 6 to be the big episodes in a similar fashion.
Okay. I don't disagree with anything you said there. I totally agree that we're not where we need to be at the halfway stage. I'm finding myself, and this is a problem when you've got a murder mystery show, I'm finding myself going away from this and going, that was a perfectly fine episode of television. It didn't reinvent the wheel by any means. It wasn't great by any means, but it was fine. And then I just forget this show ever happened until we get closer to the weekend. I'm like, shit, I've got to review that episode. I haven't thought about it once, which is a problem because it's a murder mystery that we're supposed to constantly be thinking about. It is set up, the genre is set up for us to theorize about and to get on. And they're giving us stuff to theorize about. It's just one problem. I don't care that much. You know what I mean? So I'm not invested in these characters or this storyline. The stakes are huge. They've sold me on the stakes. But also we're in a multiverse world, so it's like if this world dies, then there's millions of other worlds, and we could just go in there, and death doesn't mean anything in Marvel anymore because we're in the multiverse. So, like again, it's tough. They're kind of in a hole here, but also I'm not out of hope yet because it's not a bad TV show either. It's just not.
No,
It's not
not.
a good one yet. You know what I mean? It just hasn't. It just hasn't ascended into being good. It is just a TV show that is fine whenever it's on.
I don't think it has the hooks that some of the other ones had. Like with WandaVision was very simple. What is actually going on? And that really didn't really unveil itself until the very end. With Falcon Winter Soldier is will the Falcon accept the fact that he's a new character? And Loki, you've got just the sheer confusion of the whole thing and trying to figure out where this time way's going, what one we're in, and what the whole thing is. But with this one, it doesn't have it feels like something we've seen before. We keep comparing it to all these other espionage movies. And if that's its gimmick, then I don't know if it's enough.
Yeah, it literally is. It's like it seems like a cheap copy of the two Marvel properties that contain the Winter Soldier and the title. You know what I mean? It literally is, and they're both probably better at it. And I'm not as big on Falcon and Winter Soldier as you are, but like again, when I look at it in its totality, I'm like that was a full TV show. Now this could still do that. It has 3 episodes left to do so. So again, I don't know. One of my problems is as well. And again, we can get onto this because we've kind of touched on it already. Whether it follows through on it or not, it is extremely quick to fridge. And for me, that is unforgivable for Marvel in the 21st century, where fridging is something that literally came from their world. And it's something that, like, again, they know, they're aware of, they're very conscious. And we see even in the likes of She-Hulk with a lot of references they make, they're conscious of modern sensibilities, and they're even a lot of character changes they made, Hank Pym probably being the most notable. They've modernized their views and kind of taken away the problematic stuff that have gone. Shang-Chi, also another notable one. And then they're just doing this trope. Now, I don't think they did fridge. I don't think anyone has. And as well, like, you know, we did say into the spoilerverse, but you probably read this already if you're listening. Like, Gaia died, quote unquote, this week. But there's also a clip in the trailer of her that seems important. And again, Marvel have faked trailers before and stuff. So again, it's not 100% nailed down. But like, they didn't get in Emilia Clarke just to die in 3 episodes and have no character beats or anything. So I have a problem with this because even if she comes back, they still did the thing. They still killed a woman to motivate a man. And it's just something they're falling back on. And I've got a funny feeling they're going to do it with Priscilla as well. It's a problem. But let's talk about I want to get your thoughts if you have anything to add on that, but also as well, Gaia, and your thoughts on that whole happening.
It's the death of Superman syndrome. I do think that she's going to be fine. One, the obvious one is a trailer. and two is that we had that callback, second callback to Extremis, which has that healing element. You could see it restoring the veterans who they were testing it on in Iron Man 3, and then you could see uh like earlier on in the episode where Gravik used it to heal his hand. So, and then like we've seen her messing around the machine, which is obviously going to create Super Scrolls. I'm also very, very happy that he did give us the fan service enough to name drop Super Scrolls, which once like discussed, it's a really hokey name, but it works in this case, the way he used it. And I like when they can just write little lines of dialogue around that just to give us the stuff that makes sense. I take the iconography or the mythology from the pages and just put them on the screen, no matter how silly they are. Because at the end of the day, I mean, one of the most popular characters of all time in Marvel does wear yellow and sky blue spandex. So, the rule of cool doesn't always come into play, but they fit it in for us. So yeah, like I just think that like she's messing around with the extremists, and that's gonna be the big kind of payoff. I don't think we're here next episode, or maybe at the very end. Pop, I'm still here. No one's shocked. But I think she's already become the Super Scroll herself, and that's what's gonna save her. She's playing dead. They also really push the whole idea that, if you die as a scroll, you revert back. And the fact that it so obviously happened to her, it's almost like it's too obvious that this is her way of tricking Gravix into thinking, okay, yeah, she's dead. But I think everyone knows that she's not.
Is there a chance? Because this killed me at the time when it happened. Because again, I didn't buy this for a second. I didn't even have an emotional reaction. I didn't even have the slightest hint of a gasp. I didn't even hiccup when she was shot. But I did go, what the fuck? Because I'm like, you're a Skrull. Like, you can change into any living organism. And especially if she's messing around and she's been around the machines, whether they know it or not, where she can mess around with the superpowers. So we've got to believe that she can turn into she could turn into a fucking ant if she wanted to. So do we think that this is a plot hole, or where like this show is just really not grasping what the Skrulls are, or kind of writing conveniently, and as such we should kind of take everything they write with a pinch of salt? Or do we think this was part of a trap, and that she wanted Gravik to catch her and know and think that she was dead?
Yeah, I think we needed to see that it was her, that if she suddenly morphed into someone else, it might become too confusing for like a casual fan or someone who's just like, kind of half watching in the background because it's a new show on every week. So they need to keep some of those like story elements just like kindergarten level obvious, like really just like guide us through the story. I understand why they do that stuff. You can get like deeper into that. Like if she would disguise herself as the old man again that she did earlier in the episode, and then he was shot by Gravik, then he reverted briefly back into her T1000 at the end of Terminator style, and then back into the scroll version. That would be it. But did he have that in the budget? Is that important? No, I think just I think it was just another mechanic used to show us that, like, oh, here she comes. Oh, she got shot. I'm so shocked. And then it turns out, no, we know it's all fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I do get that. And I think you're right. I think that's the most likely logic for this. I don't know if it's like it could be a double bluff, because it gets her off the board and now she can go back to Talos, and like she's presumed dead. So now she can actually do some work. She's not going to get another form again because Amelia Clark is expensive. But and I understand that, and I don't want to criticize them too much. But earlier in the episode, we did see her become someone else, and we saw her kind of do that. So again, I don't know if I'd necessarily forgive them, but I do agree with your assessment of it. It was a big Talos episode. Obviously, look, he stood up to Gravik, got in his face. I know we kind of made light of it earlier, but like he did actually, we saw him be badass here. He got the opportunity, and Fury even gave him the deference to kind of essentially give him credit for everything Nick Fury achieved, which is a big push for Talos. Basically, everything we've enjoyed in the MCU, Talos is now responsible for, essentially, is what this episode revealed. Is this one of these cases? Because now I'm starting to get suspicious of this, because it feels like they're building them up for a fall. And I don't know. I don't think Talos is making out of this series. What's your own thoughts?
Yeah, possibly. I think he's run his course. He was supposed to introduce us to the whole concept of scrolls, scroll culture, and I think he served that purpose, both in Captain Marvel, and now in Secret Invasion. So if the character has done all he can do, and we need to either have the scrolls constantly in the background as a secret rocket pack to whip out when we need to keep a character alive when we also need to kill them. But Gravix or Talos himself, excuse me, he will probably not make it through this episode or this series.
Yeah, and again, this is why, you know, time-honored tradition in these type of stories. You introduce a child, the child's there to take over, the parent makes a heroic sacrifice. We kind of know the beats that it's probably going to go. Let's call a spade a spade. This show isn't telling us that it's going to go left and really surprise us. But yeah, interesting times. Another kind of note around the episode, and I don't think we even need to touch this, but needed more Olivia Colman. Like, she's the best part of your show. You cannot get enough Olivia Colman.
Is it because we're getting more of her than next week or something like that? And this was just the week that they were just doing more shots. Like, I mean, they wanted to keep it more Talos centric. So maybe that's all it was. Maybe there just wasn't room there. Maybe some of it ended up on the cut room floor. We don't know, but at least she was kept relevant there with that phone call, which was pretty much there to remind us that she's there somehow. But yeah, at the same time, it just didn't really serve any purpose.
Yeah. There's literally like, look, we signed you for 6 episodes. We got to get you in somewhere. And well, like, it did let her know that she's got a leak in there, and like she's kind of hunting out someone who's obviously leaking info too. Although obviously she wasn't surprised by that, because last week she seemed to see it as inevitability. She came along and immediately asked for the escape room. But yeah, like, she's the best part of your show. Like, so I really hope that now we're going to get an overdose of her in the next 3 episodes, because I think the show badly needs her. I'm very okay with this show when she's in it. And this episode is the one that I barely thought about afterwards. I think the lack of Olivia Colman has a lot to do with that. But where we kind of lacked Olivia Colman, we got to meet and get to know. Obviously, the big revelation last week was Fury has a wife. She's obviously a Skrull. There was the does he know element. They just breezed past that, because much like killing off Emilia Clarke, none of us were buying it. And they knew, to be fair. So yeah, he knows. Interesting introduction to Priscilla. I think this is the strongest part of the show for me. It's the one thing that keeps me thinking, because I think they've kept their cards very close to their chest here, in terms of, like, I don't know what her game is. I don't know what her move is. And I'm very interested in it. I liked her non-answers to Fury. Again, I know what I probably feel, but it's pure guesswork. What are your own thoughts on Priscilla, and what do you think her game might be?
I'm not really fully sure yet, because I found like their interaction, even though it was the most interesting part of the episode, it was very unusual, because she seemed very relieved that he come home at the end of last episode, almost like this is a daily thing. Then we find out it's been 3 years, but has it been 3 years? And she knows he's back. She wasn't shocked when he returned. And then there was that kind of like lovey-dovey home life between them, and then suddenly he was bust out into a very serious argument with like genuine, like, you know, implications on where the relationship could and maybe should go. So and then there was the thing at the end where she took the phone call, and it seemed very clear that there's something else going on. And I've someone that I would watch that does a lot of breakdowns themselves made a very good point about when Nick uses glasses, which we know are enhanced and stuff like that, so we can see infrared, so we can probably see heartbeats. And he doesn't ever have his glasses on in the episodes where he trusts someone, where he's in having a conversation with Talos or anything like that. But he had them on. He was staring at her while he was talking to her, almost interrogating her. So, you know, was he like seeing if she was lying? Was he like, you know, doing that super spy thing where there's maybe a note written on the fridge behind her, and he's just checking to see if he can pick out the indentation left over from the pen of the one that was ripped off? Or is he trying to get clues from her? And that goes back more into the spy thing, which they focus on, but they're getting all the tropes, but they're missing some of the tropes. Like, one of the things that was best about James Bond, and, you know, even the John Wick movies, when you see him like putting his gear together, was the equipment, the technology, and the fantasy that can play at. So, you know, there's like, what was Nick doing here? What did these glasses were already capable of doing? And was he essentially checking his wife to see if she was being truthful with him about what he suspects? Just that obviously she's helping Gravix.
And then again, of course, the end, we got the revelation that was not a revelation. Again, it's something we've been openly guessing. But this is what I found interesting. Rhodey obviously appears to be talking to Gravik. This is what we know and what we can confirm. She had the expectation of talking to Gravik. He said, "You're talking to me instead," which means that he's somewhere in that communication loop. So is it deep cover? Is he a scroll? It seems to now all be pointing towards yes, but maybe this is just me overthinking the shit out of this. Now I'm starting to be like, this is a red herring. Like, this is like,
I think so too.
yeah. What's going on there? This is strange, and it's too easy.
It's meant as every episode, like we've discussed already. First episode make you to think, oh, he definitely is. Look at the way he's walking. No, second episode, he's too roady. He's not a scroll, and now we're back. He's obviously a scroll because he's actually talking between some of the scroll, like splinter cells. But also that like Priscilla, Rhodey, they were all government agents, and Rhodey did mention that he had come into contact with this, or not come into contact, he was briefed on the scrolls 12 years ago. Was this briefing by Priscilla? Like, was she the scroll who did it? Like, is there something else going on there? Are they working, like, as double agents within the scroll, this military complex that they're building? So I think it's supposed to make us automatically think, yes, he's a scroll, no, he's a scroll, yes, he's a scroll, and then next week it'll be no again. But I think this one didn't land as much. I just think, oh my God, it's Rhodey's voice. But for some reason, they didn't go, this proves he's a scroll. I just had a feeling that that's not the case, that that's where they're trying to send us, but they misfired.
Yeah, it's kind of like the show's getting into a habit of doing a non-mystery at the end. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, like they leave it on the to be continued, and then it's like, no, obviously that's not what's happening. No, obviously Nick Fury knows his wife's the Skrull. No, obviously, like Rhodey isn't a Skrull. He's Rhodey. And it's like that's not how to be continued are supposed to work. They're supposed to be exciting.
Yeah. There's this thing that right now that seems almost like something Rick and Morty would do as a parody on these types of shows. Whereas if you were to start with Nick Fury as the base element of this whole cloak and dagger setup that's going on, not the characters. There is Marvel characters called Cloak and Dagger. That wasn't a pun. I just realized what I said. But all this, spy, espionage, subterfuge, that it starts with Nick Fury, but as it goes along, there's all these converging points. So Talos being directly connected with Nick Fury, they're the closest. But and then in this episode, he said basically that I'm with Nick Fury because I can't coexist with you guys, with my people, the Skrulls. So he's kind of on the cusp where he can go two ways. And then there's his daughter who's gone one way, but it turns like she's back the other way. So I'd love to see this line, like this almost river with tributaries coming for it, as to where everyone's what's the word I'm looking for? Where their honor lies, where they're hanging their hat. What side of each respective team they're playing on, the human side or the Skrull side. And so many of them are, you think you're going up into the ally side and then they go into the enemy side, and it's going back and forth as we go through the episode, almost at a point where it's silly, where there's so many moving parts that. Do you remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger parody we used to watch about he was being we used to watch it back in the wrestling gym. He was being a secret agent, or he had a secret identity, and he's like, "No, it's actually me, but I'm you, so you're me, and that means you're not me, I'm you." I can't help but feel like that they're doing a really good job at doing that. Someone told them that was a skit, and it's not supposed to be taken seriously, let alone a blueprint for a huge production like Secret Invasion.
I'd be into it if they did. I don't know if you saw the movie Hypnotic. That is like you'd actually love it because it's Ben Affleck, but they do exactly that, and it's like, aha, now I am the one who knows everything, and you are the one who is confused. And it's just like constant twists where characters are like, aha, now I am the new person who has the knowledge.
It's just all of us are confused in the end.
I'd actually be very okay with it if it just went to shit, and it's just like we're just going to be funny and just reveal that we've wasted 6 hours of your time. I'd be very okay if they did that, but yeah, interesting times. Is there any other kind of Easter eggs or anything that kind of stood out to you from the episode?
Not a huge amount in this one. Obviously, we've got the reference to the extremists, which is going to be the way they're going to get around the Super Skrulls not having Johnny Storm's flame on power. Which the great thing with Marvel, which they do with all superpowers, is it's not just what you see on the tin. He turns into fire. The flyer can make it fly. He can shoot fire out of his hands. Like, a lot of these characters are absolutely fantastic in the way as they evolve over the years and decades, they can make their powers make a lot more sense, have some amazing abilities. Like Marvel have a great way of taking essentially crap powers, like Iceman being a great example. And in the early 2000s, they decided that Iceman was actually one of the most powerful mutants because it's not that he has the ability to turn into ice, but he can actually control every piece of nitrogen and oxygen in the Earth's climate. So he has world-ending abilities if he was motivated, to be an antagonist instead of a protagonist. So with the extremists, it's a really interesting way you've done that. You've got something in the comics that was closer to the nanobite technology that we've seen in the movies, but this is like, a kind of inner fire, almost like some sort of alchemy, but explained by science. So we can see the extremists can heal here, which it had the ability to do in a somewhat different way in the comics. But it explains this pyrokinesis ability that they're going to be able to have, which I think is really clever. So I don't think it's going to be the same as the extremists we've seen in Iron Man 3, where it's very unstable. I imagine because they've given him a small amount, and Super Skrull was always depicted as his powers were essentially split into four quarters, demonstrated by his body. He'd usually have one outstretched arm, one firearm. He'd be like half disappearing or create a force field just to show all of his powers together. So is this extremist going to be a much more concentrated, focused thing that they can like control? So instead of just detonating and healing, the healing seems very controlled. Are they going to be able to essentially cast it, like be a genuine hazard? And if that's where they're going, which would be very interesting, and see that's where they may be. Like we talked about this last week, what power is going to be able to stand up to a genuine, overpowered superhero level threat?
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. I can't wait. I'm interested to see how it looks. That is important. They have to get that right. It has to be cool. You know what I mean? Because if it's wrong, the show, I think, is dead in its arse. You know what I mean? Even if it looks lame, the show's
I
dead in
think
its
it'll be
arse.
cool. I think
Yeah,
that's what they're saving the budget for, because the special effects have been really feel like they've been pulled back. Like they've
yeah.
taken a lot of, clever enough tricks. They're clever because they work. But we've seen it before in loads of different productions where they need to cut corners. With the window coming down and them changing, walking behind stuff. I mean, it's what it is. But are they going to be saving all the budget and all the good CG for the abilities of the Super Skrulls, which you're talking about, like a lot of different, you're gonna have to generate organic fibers for the Groot arm, and then with this fire, you're gonna have a lot of different like computer generated, geometry to get this going. That's like a lot of money. And that, whereas the transformation is, there's a lot more creative interpretation. So you can make a mistake and get away because there's that suspension of disbelief. But we all know what fire looks like. So I think the budget's being saved for Super Skrull. So I'm confident they're going to look pretty cool.
Okay, interesting. Fingers crossed. So let's kind of move into, because we're already kind of getting there. Let's dip into what's on the table next week. Probably going to learn that Guy isn't dead. Probably going to get more into Rhodey, and I feel like we're going to get a Rhodey heavy episode, maybe with some backstory. You got to also consider that in the background we're seeing the machines that obviously have people. So we know Everett Ross is probably in there. There might be more people in there that we know, possibly Rhodey included, the original. I don't know if that's something we're going to get next week. That feels a little soon. Hopefully loads of Olivia Colman. But we need more Priscilla in the meantime. What happened, and Rhodey, where is that coming from, and what's that all about to kind of set us up? Is there anything else you're kind of thinking that we should get next week? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. In general, what I think the stakes need to be a bit higher, because in the first episode we had a bomb going off and they were talking about 100 people dead, which is, on the global scale, that's a pretty big deal, especially with like so much loss happening with the blip and everything. But the threat seems to have died down. It seems to be everything's happening within a bubble. And it was very promising this week with the whole thing, the thread about the sub hitting the plane, and I thought maybe if it was a case where they cancelled the launch too late and maybe it clipped it, or so there was no attack, but there was a real world implication. But the threat level needs to go up. And there needs to be a genuine threat, because once again, are we going to care about what's actually going on? The way you're talking about, we can't wrap our heads around liking these characters enough where we really feel for them. we need the threat to be big enough so that we actually feel the peril itself.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that come to fruition.
It was such a surprising move, I think. And it's such a rare move you see in these type of stories where, like, they took away the stakes. It's like everything shit's gonna hit the fan if this happens, and then it's like, well, we're not gonna let it happen. And it's like, but shit kind of needs to hit the fan for this to be interesting.
But it looks like the shit ban hitting has happened in the first episode.
Yeah.
So now we're just dealing with the smell of shit because we can put the fan back on. So, it's like someone needs to turn the fan off and throw it out the window. Maybe it'll explode. I don't know.
Do something with that fucking fan is what we're saying here.
Fans ruining everything.
We're peaking. It's not going to get better. We're wrapping there. Lynam. Let's see next week if the fan is still there or not. Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Page 180.
That was